Good afternoon, folks, and we are back for Chapter 13, Wedding Bells in Henry Barrie, Vimy Ridge Survivor. Henry settled back to his farming life once again, but a changed man. The years of 1919 and 1920 remained hard. The Spanish influenza had came to Lanark County, and every week there would be 5 or 6 new obituaries in the village of 500 people. The Barries isolated themselves on their farm and only went to neighbors if they knew they were healthy. Henry continued to work on the farm with Father Tom and Rankin, but he had bigger plans. He continued to attend church every Sunday, but would leave every evening for Drummond Township, where Nettie and her parents had moved during the war. After a year, Henry bought the next farm over from Father and Wesley and began to build his log house. On March 17th, Henry completed the house and headed to Mr. Davidson with a big question. When he arrived, Nettie answered the door with a huge smile. Henry, how is the house coming? It's done, Nettie, and it looks great. The house is about 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, with a loft for the bedroom, windows on every side, including one up in the loft. I also built a lean-to onto it where the kitchen is located and the woodshed is in the back. The stove and the chimney are also in the back, and the roof is completely shingled. The paddocks are completely fenced with cedar rails and come right up to the house, and there's room for a barn right beside it. Oh, it sounds wonderful, Henry, Nettie replied. Henry then asked, Is your father here, Nettie? Yes, Henry, he's right here. Henry said, Hello, Mr. Davidson. I have a question to ask you. Mr. Davidson said with a big smile, Yes, Henry. What do you want to know? Henry took a big breath and said, I would like to ask your daughter to marry me. Are you all right with that? Mr. Davidson smiled while Mrs. Davidson grabbed Nettie's arm. Of course, Henry. I would be happy to have her marry you. Henry walked up to Nettie, got down on one knee, took a ring out from his jacket, and said, Nettie, will you marry me and make me the happiest man on earth? Nettie started crying, but managed to say yes before giving Henry a hug. Henry stood up and said, With this ring, Nettie, I promise to be a good husband and look after you as long as I live. The next 2 months were busy ones. Henry was busy back at the farm getting crops planted, doing the chores, and helping Father. Nettie was making plans and updating Henry every Sunday night as to what was happening. Henry, are you all right if we just have the wedding here at the house? Grandmother can make it here. Of course, Nettie. I think this would be a beautiful place to get married. I was thinking we could get married on June 21st. Mother had been working on a dress for a while. I'd like to be at the farm with you as soon as possible. Really? So you're telling me that me asking you to marry me wasn't that big of a secret? Henry said with a smile. Nettie smiled back and said, No, not really. Your mother had mentioned to my aunt that you had a ring. Henry just shook his head and said, Oh, Ma. The following Sunday, when Henry and Nettie met again, Nettie said, We have a problem with June 21st. Reverend Ferguson isn't available. What should we do? Henry said, Don't worry, Nettie. I'll ask Reverend Caswell to marry us. Plus, Mrs. Caswell can play the piano for us. Oh, Henry, that's perfect. And Nettie, I have something for you. I don't know what your dress looks like, but I'm told these pearls will go with anything. Henry took out a string of pearls and bent over to place them over Nettie's neck. Nettie stood on her tiptoes, smiling and staring into Henry's eyes. After Henry put them on her neck, they kissed. Henry, they're beautiful. Thank you, Nettie said while staring at Henry the entire time. On July 6, 1922, the Perth Expositor had the following notice. Wedding bells, Barrie Davidson. On Wednesday, June 21st, a very pretty wedding took place at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Davidson. The occasion was the marriage of their daughter, Nettie Davidson, to Mr. Henry G. Barrie of Watson's Corners, son of Mr. and Mrs. James Barrie. The marriage was performed by Reverend J. T. Caswell of Watson's Corners due to the absence of Reverend T. J. S. Ferguson. At 5:30 p.m., the bride, escorted by her father, took her place under an arch of evergreens and bunting fronting the lawn to the strains of Mendelssohn's Wedding March played by Mrs. J. T. Caswell. The bridegroom joined her a minute later, and under the pretty canopy, the minister made the couple a happy one. Some 40 guests of family and close friends celebrated the occasion, including the bride's grandmother of 91 years, who appears hearty and hale. The bride was prettily and becomingly attired in a suit of navy taffeta trimmed with a sand-colored silk, with a navy hat to match. She wore a beautiful bouquet of Ophelia roses. She also had a very handsome string of decollete pearls, the gift of the groom. The happy pair will take up their residence at Watson's Corners, where Mr. Barrie had bought a farm. And so that brings us to the next stage in Henry's life, where he's moved on from World War I and he's moving on to the next portion. He begins on his own farm with Nettie, and they begin to form their family up in the Watson's Corners area. But as we will see later in the book, Henry is not one to stay still for very long, and so he's already thinking about his next steps and where he wants to go. And so we'll be reading about that in the following chapter. Thank you.